This is your cell.
Si eres ladrillo, seré concreto. Si eres oreja, seré Van Gogh. Si eres...
فما كاري ابيض فما ريكتانجل ابيض فيرتيكال.
تو دي تصور دي كيك
اي بنات
Oder bleibt es Utopie? Jeder Mensch weiß, es ist ein Kreis, nimmer weit, Elend und Leid, der nie getreibt, innerlich schreit sich zerreißt.
Hello, a warm welcome to the third evening of the Berlin Critics Week, especially from our debate program. Today we are talking about the films Sunrise in My Mind by Danech and FAUNA by Nicolás Pereda. And we are discussing under the title PLAYACT together with the directors and with Lola Arias, Constanze Becker, and the whole debate is moderated by Bert Rebhandl. I'm just here to say hello, and if you have any questions related to the debate, you could use our Telegram channel. You find the link to it directly under the video or next to the video. So yeah, if you have questions, comments, or anything, ask it there and we hand it over to the moderator. Thanks for joining. I hope you also take a look at the other programs. For the following week, we have films and debates every evening, and you could watch all the films already online. On Friday, for example, we have our second festival partnership, including a short film program and the film Watch Over Me, and we hope that you're also joining the debates every evening at 8 p.m. So yeah, now let's start with the debate for PLAYACT. A warm welcome to all of you. Now I pass the mic to Bert.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here, the four of us, and you in the audience on YouTube or wherever you are. I will introduce very briefly the four participants in the discussion. Two of them are filmmakers, participants in the Woche der Kritik. Danech is part of the Woche der Kritik with her short film Sunrise in My Mind. She's a filmmaker from Cambodia, living and working in Phnom Penh now, where it's 2 a.m. already in the morning. Thank you for staying up with us. She was in Germany, if I'm informed correctly, 2 years ago with her film A Million Years, is that right? And now she's here with us online because it's not possible any other way, unfortunately. Nicolás Pereda is a filmmaker from Mexico. He's in the Woche der Kritik this year with FAUNA. And the three protagonists of FAUNA he has worked with for a long time. There is a film by the name of Juntos from 2009, which also already has the same names of protagonists. And if I understood correctly, it's also the same actors. Unfortunately, I have not seen Juntos yet. That is by and large the period since when you have been active as a feature filmmaker. I think 2009 were your first feature-length films, if I understood correctly. And you have a very particular style, which we will find about more in the discussion anyway, so I will not try to describe it yet at the moment. And then we invited two more guests to give their perspective on the two films that we have as our topic tonight, and on the topic of acting, performing in general, because both of them are experts in this field for various reasons. Lola Arias is originally from Argentina. She's in Berlin, strongly associated with Gorki Theater. She has worked in theater and performing arts for a long time. And she was, which is an interesting and important detail, also part of the Berlinale Forum Film Festival in 2018 with a feature film, documentary film, Theater of War. And Constanze Becker, she has been one of the most important stage actresses in Germany for quite a while now. In 2008, she was Actress of the Year, selected by the important magazine Theater Heute. Incidentally and luckily, her training as an actress at Ernst Busch Schule in Berlin was documented by Andres Feil, who was working on a documentary film at that time about young people studying acting, and she was, Constanze Becker was in it, Die Spielwütigen, it is called. She is now a member of the Berliner Ensemble and has interestingly refrained mostly from working for television and cinema. She has not done it very often, which maybe she can give a few hints about why. It would be interesting to hear something maybe about the difference between these two aspects. Anyway, those are the four participants, and I would like to start the discussion or our talk, maybe with a question to Danech. Your film takes place in a beauty salon in, I guess, Phnom Penh, and there is three girl main actresses and basically one male lead. Maybe you can say a few words about the people we see in the film. Are they actors? Are they people that you cast specifically for this film? How did you find them? You have to switch on your microphone, Danech.
Yeah, so for this film, I specifically choose the cast in the film because the first is that the main actress, she used to be played an important role of my friend's feature film Diamond Island 5 years ago, and then I'm just kind of like her so much that it's like when I wrote the script, I was just thinking of her, the first thing, like that. And then the two other actresses, they used to work with me for another film that we shot in 2019. And the two, one of them was in a costume department and another one was in a makeup department. So I got to know them through the film and start to, somehow see they have this kind of like charming character that I was just decided to choose them. And then for the male lead, it's the same, like I met them through the film. He actually was a driver for the lighting department. So that's how I discover the three of them. But I would say like most of them are very, very non-professional actors. They only one has an experience in a feature film, but the rest is just like their first film.
Mm-hmm. And then pretty much early in the movie, you have a little scene where we see on a telephone a scene from another movie, or like maybe a television serial or something, it would be interesting to know where you took it from, and maybe you can say a few words about what its function in the story is, because it's actually a comment, reflective comment on acting, or what actors do in like conventional storytelling somehow, if I understood.
Yeah, I discovered the film during the pre-productions of the film that I worked in 2019, and we're just trying to find some old footage, like a documentary or films, to put in like a TV sequence. And then we looked like different thing, and then I just came across to that on YouTube actually, because it's just so easy to find like old films with bad quality and on YouTube. And then for me, what caught to me is that first is the music for the opening credit, what they do. But then when it's come to the beginning, it's just like something about surprised me, how the way the actors in that film, like the acting, because I always curious about like when I noticed that for the people that close to my circle, they love watching like a kind of drama movie, and has it like all these actings always a bit dramatic, but it's kind of this kind of attraction for them that they love to watch that. And but I'm trying to understand like why it's like, it's for me it's also like the questions about to make films about reality, or you transform reality into a film. So it's also something about the acting also, like if in a reality, like when these two people meet each other, their reaction would be not that kind of I would say like in a movie, in that movie it was kind of exaggerated, the way they speak, the way that they talk. So for me, I'm trying to understand also like what is it, maybe it's the reality, like in that during the 90s, like how people talk in that way, and then now in present time, like it is different. So I would say like it's kind of a mix that I was not clear that is it how to define that.
Mm-hmm. Nicolás, you have worked with these three characters like Gabino, Paco, and Luisa for a long time. They are recurring in your films. Now you have in FAUNA, you have a scene where we see a little bit how common people, if we can say so, conceive of acting in a television series, and they ask one of the characters in your film to act as an actor, actually, like to act as an actor within the film. Maybe you can say a few words about what got you to do this scene, and what interested you about it in particular.
I mean, that's a central scene to me in the film, and it's perhaps also the kind of the most accomplished scene in the movie, I think, when Paco acts his character in Narcos. And it's a complicated scene because it kind of requires a little bit of context of how I got to it, which has to do with the fact that Paco actually acts in the TV show Narcos in his life, in his professional life. And sort of, I mean, these are my close friends, and Gabino has acted also like in these sort of narco movies in the past. And I've always wondered, first, kind of why do they do this? And what does it mean? And I don't care about why other people do it generally. I mean, I could, but I don't think about it too much. But these are my good friends, and these are close friends. And also the theater that they do is very political. And so there seemed to me always like this kind of contradiction between sort of their politics on stage and their politics on screen in a way. And it was a way of challenging them a little bit to talk about this. And so, but I hadn't seen Paco on Narcos actually. I just knew that he was acting in it because they told me about it. And so I watched the first season looking for him, and I was like fast forwarding and then watching some things. And then, I also get kind of hooked into the drama. I generally don't watch these things, but I think it's not because I don't like it necessarily. It's just because I can get addicted to it as well, like most people. So I would start watching, and then I could never find Paco. It was like the strangest thing. I knew that he would appear at some point, but he appears very little in the series, and he hardly has any dialogue. And so I knew while I was watching it that I wanted to do something with it for the film. And then it became harder to think about what will he do with it if he's hardly in it and he doesn't have many dialogues. And so that's kind of how the whole scene was conceived, this idea that is a person that his identity has become linked to this big TV show. Because, if someone asks you, so what do you do? It's like, I'm an actor. It's like, what have you been in? And then they list my films. Everybody's like, sorry, I don't know. But then in the moment he says Narcos, at least in Mexico, everybody will know. And so it's his small participation in this TV show is way more central to the perception of his identity than all of his theater work that he's done and all of the films that he's done with other people and so on. So I thought it was kind of funny to make him recreate his silent parts in that scene. And so it's kind of like several things. This kind of this idea that he needs to sort of fulfill a certain identity for the world because he's been in this show, and the contradiction of doing that within my film. So it's a little bit meta in that sense, that he's actually has tons of dialogues in this film that nobody will watch, but then he has to perform the little scene that everybody will watch, but without dialogues. So I was interested in all of that in relation to them specifically, to the actors. And then I was interested sort of in this general idea of the construction of history, of contemporary history through these shows. Sort of like the fact that we're living through what Narcos is presenting in a way, like so this kind of narco civil war, or this violence is a contemporary problem. It's not a historical problem, and it's being dramatized before our eyes. Like as it's happened, it's being dramatized. So like people are writing screenplays about things that are happening in the moment. But so there's a danger in all of this. So how do we understand our own contemporary history? So because the actors I work with are involved in these constructions of these histories, and I'm interested also about sort of how do we understand our present through representation. And I think this is a kind of thing that any filmmaker, more or less, or perhaps would be interested in, because you are in a way creating small portraits of your present, even if it's fiction. Anyway, so I wanted to comment on the way contemporary Mexican history is being portrayed and is being constructed by these shows.
It's even like to a certain degree a little bit that the narco wars better never stop, because it's the one selling item that Mexico has in popular culture. And it's might sound a little cynical to put it like this, but anyway, it's something that basically sells Mexico to Netflix and to the global audiences.
Yeah, but it's this kind of there was this artist Renzo Martins that made that project of Enjoy Poverty, and this idea that poverty is kind of like a natural resource, but the problem is that it's exploited by the wrong people. So it's not the people that are suffering the poverty that actually are able to exploit the to make money out of their misery, but it's others who are actually able to cash in the misery of others. And it's kind of like a similar situation, because obviously all the people that are the victims of the narco world are not the ones that are participating in this Netflix shows or making a profit out of it.
Mm. The structure that actors who work, for example, for the stage and have on the side or in a second part of their career parts for television or for cinema that are highly more visible is, I think, part of the life and work of many actresses and actors for reasons that are completely individual to everybody. But Constanze, in your case, I was already hinting on it, that you have for actress of your status, you have a less visibility or a little visibility in film and television. And is that caused by a conscious decision of yours, because you are thinking about this? In some cases, it is something like a contradiction even, yeah, that parts of the work that somebody does that may be high profile and has lesser visibility, and other parts are maybe a little bit more lowbrow or whatever. Or should we not make too much of this aspect of your career?
It happened somehow. I started with my studies for theater. I didn't had in mind that I would make films later. Because when I was a child, I saw this magic world of theater, and I wanted to become part of it. And later, I liked more and more the family in theater and the process of working for a long time. And I think I had more influence on my work in theater than in film. And yes, I like that. And on the other hand, you're right that I don't feel well in this visibility of the of this film world. I was once at the part of the Berlinale with this documentary you mentioned, and it was very strange for me, this feeling of being part of the public, of being exposed to all the people. And even in my private life, I try to separate my privacy from my work. So I have a different name when I'm with my children, and I have my artist name when I'm at work. I try to separate these both worlds, and yes, I think.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Lola, you have blurred the definitions of what is an actor, an actress, or what is a protagonist, or what is a real life person in your work basically constantly. Like, do you have actually something like a conception of acting as opposed to things that you are pursuing with your practices?
Wasn't the sound. I'm always surprised when people say, you have real people on stage, as if actors would be like somehow made of some other thing that is not real people. But in fact, what I'm interested in is the experience of creating these spaces of social experiment, let's say, that the rehearsal space should be something more than the reproduction of literary texts with actors. For me, the rehearsal space more and more became a space of investigation, of research, of like putting people together that can bring a problematic into a theater. So like really yeah, I started to conceive this situation of rehearsing as something else, not rehearsing a play or a text and rehearsing gestures and movements or emotions, but creating a situation that then is going to be developed, writing a text together with the performers about a certain situation, whether it's unaccompanied minors who arrived to Germany during the refugee waves of 2015, or if it's war veterans that are reconstructing the history of war. I'm interested in this social experiment of bringing these people together and developed an artistic project with them. And that became more and more important for me. And even, I mean, it's not that there is no actors. Sometimes there are actors who also jump into these social experiments and work together with these people. But yeah, I'm starting to conceive like theater as something else. And that's why I started to work with people that don't come from theater.
Mm-hmm. Constanze, if you recall Danech's film, you saw it, you said, yeah, we have this young boy who is coming to meet this girl at the beauty salon. And this actor, or the way he acts this role, is actually very much, we could say, reduced. Yeah, he does not say much. He plays a character who is not very good with words, let's say it like that. Yeah, and everything, most of the things that happen between the protagonists are actually without words on other levels. Your practice of theater, in most cases, is very much based on words, because the theater plays that you work with are the basic material. Yeah. How do you see a performance like this in this case? What do you see in this example? What interests you in such a scene?
I liked very much the moment of the hair washing and this kind of massage. I don't know, it's not so easy to express with words. In the end, the last picture of this film, the last pictures, for me it was like a stage, or like a stage. And you said that in theater I'm mostly working with words, but I think it changes somehow. I have worked with choreographers or filmmakers on stage and discover very new ways of expression, which I liked very much to express. Even I worked with a Canadian choreographer on Macbeth, and he didn't understand a word of German, and he said, you have to talk with your bodies. And I had to think about that when I saw the film of Danech and the short scene of this serial, or whatever it was, where it's different if the bodies are in interaction, or if with love, or to get together, or if they talk about it. And it reminds me of this director who said to us, you have to talk with your bodies, you have to get together only with bodies, and to express this story only by feeling and touching. And yes, and this was also this scene of this hair washing, which I liked very much in this film.
Mm-hmm. As you said, the last scene, it's almost like what we in Germany, that has the light, you know. It's were you aware probably of the stage aspect of this cadrage, or like how you framed the image here? It's the microphone again, Danech.
Sorry. I would say, like, for me it's how to say, I think, like, from where I grew up, it's a place, a society that we don't talk a lot. It's very I would say, like, we don't express much, like with the people like around me as I grow older. It's like there's some, you don't speak what you think, or you don't speak what you feel. You kind of like fishing with words and stuff like that. So I could see, like, based on what I see in films from other country, I would say like it's a total different of expressions. So that that for me in that part, I mean, even in the film in the beginning, like how they talk and stuff like that, but when they start to express what inside, it's like a total two different people for that the character. And for the last scene, for me, I would say it's some kind of I wanted to try something about how about putting the two together in a box. It's like what I could see. It's like something like when I start to have fish tank. I mean, in real life, like I have a fish tank. It's like something that I build the system for this system, and then I just get the fish and then I put them together. Maybe they like each other, or maybe they don't. So it's some kind of like an experiment to see. And I would say like it's the same thing as when you make film, like as a director, and you cast, you have your actress, your actors, and put them together and you see how they interact. So I'm kind of like repeat that process into the film, and then to define like what is it about these fictions and reality mixing together.
Thank you. Lola, you have maybe even a little bit more context than we have regarding the work of Nicolás, because you know a little bit more about his actors. Maybe you can just give us a little bit of an impression of what started your interest in FAUNA, like which scenes or what aspects were there that got you thinking and feeling and whatever.
Yeah, I really love the film, and I am big fan of Gavino, Lázaro Gavino, Luisa, Paco, the actors. I know them from the stage because they have this group that is called Lagartijas Tiradas al Sol, an amazing theater group. They do also a work that is in between reality and fiction, very documentary also about the history of Mexico. So I really find it amazing to see them also as theater artists, how they are also playing roles in the films of Nicolás. And what I like the most is that, in fact, I see a lot of theatricality in the film. I see a lot of scenes that are like scenes inside of scenes that become very theatrical, like, and I have the feeling that I love how the characters are somehow all the time making like auditions for something. You don't know what exactly, like they have to prove something with the acting. And this I love. I love the scene of the bar when he has to somehow prove the father-in-law that he is an actor. I like the scene between Luisa and the mother where she's performing for the mother, and then the mother is performing for the daughter, and there is a kind of competition of who is the best actress in the scene. I love the scene when the characters of Flora and the other characters play the sister. Yeah, I like all these layers of fiction and how they move between these situations. Yeah, I like the fact that the film is it's like the 1001 Nights, like there is something that is never like ending, so that the film goes until the middle, and then okay, I'm reading this book and let's go into the book. And then the book has, and then in this story, there is other stories, so no story has an end. This I really liked about the film. And that in fact, the end is just a secret. That I also found amazing, that there is just like these two characters and one of them is making, like telling a secret to the other. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Beautiful. I also love the film of Danech, I have to say, also very, very beautiful. And I love the way these characters are very like, yeah, very delicate how they perform in this. I love their voices. I was thinking whether you chose these actors because of their voices and the way they speak. I mean, they have this tone, very special.
Yeah, part of the casting is voice also in that. I think it is my own interest into love to listen what they're saying. So
Yeah, there is amazing thing about the voices. Also, how the character in the little film speak has a incredible voice, but also the all the hairdressers, they have amazing voices, and there is for me something very musical in all your work. Not only the music that is playing a role, but also the voices as music somehow.
yeah, and I do see in the salon. That's why I was inspired that, because when I was in a salon and stuff like that, the way they talk, the way they move, the way they hold the hairs of the customer, it's for me it's like a play. Like it almost feel like that, and that even the way they talking, like I could see like it's like in a theater, like you just sit there, but you could listen to them like almost everything. Yeah.
Nicolás, there is an interesting aspect to your film in the fact that in the second part, there's a lot of mirroring, of course, between first and second part, but the second part also has an interesting authorial status, if I can say so, because actually, if I understood correctly, in the second part, we are somehow in the reading process of a book that was part of the first part, or we are all even like in a somehow something like an improvised imagination of how to visualize or adapt in the medium of a movie a reading experience of a book that has not even been finished reading, so that we don't know where the plot is actually going. Was that something that, first of all, did I understand correctly what you were up to? And was that something that also like had an impact on the way you conceived of the acting of the second part, or of what the characters were supposed to do in the second part?
The reading of the book was kind of a small device in order to be able to go to a different universe. And the fact that he hadn't really read much of it helped with the possibility of the second part not needing to make very concrete sense. So like not to be too attached to let's say a published book. So that we could read the second part perhaps as the imagination of this particular person, and so they would place themselves in that context, but in a more sort of exciting, perhaps, situation. But in relation to the acting, I think it was a possibility. This is a strange film for me. I've never made a film where the actors have this level, like wigs and this kind of more, they're able, where they get outside of the people a bit more, the actors themselves, where the characters are a little bit more detached from the people. And it was the structure gave me that possibility of trying to experiment a little bit with them, not as my friends exactly, but some extension of them. And in general, the whole project, to me, like the acting project perhaps with them, is to create characters that help me through the characters, make portraits of the performers. So it's not so much about the characters, sorry, it's not so much about the actors reading the screenplay and then transforming themselves into whatever characters I wrote, but it's more about the actors, the characters that I write to be transformed and become the actors, if that makes any sense. So I'm more interested in them destroying the characters that I write, so that not so that they invent their own characters, but so that there is not too much of a character to speak of, so that it's not about, it's a bit complicated. I've always have difficulty explaining it, but I guess it's mainly the idea that I don't want them to be themselves, because what does that even mean? But I want them to play themselves. So in order to play themselves, I give them some character so that they can have something to play with. But at the end of the day, it is a portrait of my friends to a certain degree. And because all the films, the acting more or less resemble each other. I mean, it changes a little bit, but it's always kind of in the same idea of this portrait. FAUNA gave me the possibility in the second part of playing at a different level. I'm still interested in this idea of the portrait, but now they could, put wigs on, and in that gesture of the wigs, it's almost like everything is, the transformation is a little bit, or the game is a little bit expanded itself a little bit. So they can, the characters that they generally use to show themselves, let's say, now these characters are a little bit more complicated, or more allow for more games. I don't know if it was clear. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you could say a few words about your career in that sense, that we often hear, or I'm a film journalist and I do often hear this complaint in art house cinema worldwide, actually, that it's very much script based, and that all the projects have to go through a very elaborate script that has then be transformed into a movie, but it still remains basically a script project that becomes a movie. But language and the scenario per se is the thing that has to go through all the stages of financing and everything, and pitching, project development and whatever. And your films, they seem to me as if they kind of like evaded or like circumnavigated all these stages of development and everything. Has that made your career maybe a little bit more difficult than you would have liked, or is it a conscious decision of yours to kind of like try to find a certain slot within the industry, or would you like to go some other dimension, some other ways anyway at some point?
I mean, I just never considered the industry, really. It was just not part. It also seemed a bit distant at the time when I started making films. So I was 23 years old and I didn't have many connections and so on. So it didn't seem like, it seemed like if I wanted to make a film in the industry, it would take a couple more years to develop some connections, meet producers, that sort of thing, which is fine, but I was just a bit impatient, so I was not thinking about it in those terms. I've always thought it was funny that, because you mentioned this idea that the screenplay is at the center of things, that at least in the United States, they have this, and Mexico is very close to the United States, so we also suffer from that, but they have this figure of the script doctor, which I think is kind of a great name, because it's kind of like the scripts are sick, and then there's someone that has to come and heal them somehow. And the healing process of a script generally means sort of making them all kind of fit the same mold, which is also kind of a strange idea. But I don't think about it too much, because my films are relatively cheap as well, so it makes it also easy in that sense. And because I started working with people that were my friends, then it was easier to, at the beginning, not pay them. And we were all very young, so it's different to not pay your 22-year-old, 23-year-old friends than now. I mean, now I pay them, but it was okay to start making things And they were also working in theater in very similar sort of circumstances. So it was easy for them to understand that, yes, we were gonna, I mean, that film that you mentioned, Juntos, was shot in the apartment of Gavino at the time. And they were rehearsing a play in the mornings and we were shooting in the afternoon. So it seemed kind of very normal that we were, it was okay. It didn't, the idea that this was like the idea of professionalism and the career and so on came kind of later, just kind of because, you know, that happens to people, but it seemed very, it was just the organic thing to do was just kind of to write what you could and to shoot it however you could in order to not have to wait for or compete, basically compete with others. And also it was really also the sense that we're not going to get funding, not because at the time it was not because the system is broken or because whatever. It was more like there's hundreds of people wanting to make movies. There is a finite amount of money. Who are we to get the money? Like there's no reason why we would get it. We don't have experience. We don't have. So it seemed like the normal thing to do. And then once we started making films that way, it seemed like we liked it. There was no, it was not like there was a need to conceive a different, it was not like the starting point or like the trampoline or whatever to something else. It was kind of like we like how we're making things and we actually enjoy the process, but we also like the movies in the same, and these are parallel projects in a way that, because in the theater world that these actors work in, it's kind of similar. They started making these plays with no money, they acting with each other, rehearsing on their living room. And 15 years later, they're still doing exactly the same thing. And so it's almost like it was never like the films and the plays in this case were never like springboards for something bigger. So I haven't really thought too much about how the industry will, like how to apply. I mean, we get funding now, both of us, but we get funding through sort of parallel means, which are like more art center grants, let's say, where the understanding of a project proposal is very different than in an industrial model. So it's easier for us to, you know, to approach those funding systems and those places we can explain our projects in also different ways. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's kind of yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Script doctoring probably today has to be more like script gym instructor or fitness instructor, you know, so that movies have muscles in the right parts of the body, things like this. Yeah. Both of your films have a little consideration, or like they have there's a thinking reflection within the films about the relation between popular culture in your countries or in the cultures that you work in, and the status of your protagonists who act or behave differently from how certain topics or tropes like love or being in love or being attracted to somebody are acted out in telenovelas or daily soaps and things like this. Yeah. I would like to ask Constanze how much your perception of popular culture in Germany, but also worldwide, how much time do you have actually, for example, to watch cinema, but also in Germany and in other countries, it's similar. We are now going through a big shift because the big success of the television series has also changed our idea of what storytelling in audiovisual media can mean. Constanze, is it a part for you professionally, but also as a private person? Do you watch cinema, for example? Do you watch actors and actresses specifically for their craft? Maybe do you have actors, stars that you like for particular reasons? And are you aware of this shift? Like that's, for example, at the moment in Germany, everybody's talking about Wir Kinder vom Bahnhof Zoo, which is a new television series based on this famous film from the 80s about this girl going through a drug addiction in Berlin in the 80s. all these things do a lot also to aspiring actors and actresses. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a general question, but how do you perceive of all that, Constanze, and how much time do you even give yourselves to watch these things, or maybe you try to keep away from them to a certain degree?
I have not much time, but in the evening I sit with my husband and we're watching new things, old things, to get some input to discuss, sometimes for a special kind of work or sometimes to enjoy it. And I'm kind of strange because when I heard that there's a serial about this Kinder of Bahnhof Zoo, for example, I saw the pictures outside in the streets, and I was wondering how the clothes and the makeup is, and I find it very strange. But because today it's very clean and it's very beautiful. It's all very beautiful. And I saw the pictures and I said to myself, no, I don't think that I want to watch this. And I went to Videodrome because I like to go and take DVDs to my home and watch them, not to stream it. And I got the old film of Kinder from the Bahnhof Zoo, and because I haven't seen it, and yes, this is I'm not so I think influenced by the common, yes, the common opinion and the common movies. I'm very slow in this yes, in this aspect, and sometimes for a special role I watch I don't know, Laurel and Hardy and some kind of comedies, sitcoms from the 80s, and I don't know. Yes, I'm not up to date with most things.
Mm-hmm. But still, it sounds like that there might be, with the high impact of the popular television formats now, that maybe acting, or like how acting is conceived of now, is probably not so much modeled on cinema anymore and on theater, because theater has changed a little bit its position within the cultures as well. But I think on Netflix and Amazon Prime to a certain degree, and we are probably in the process, but of some changes in that sense. But we should not go too deep into this, because it will distract us from the two films that we have at the center of a discussion. I would ask, I have already 3 questions here that I will come to in a minute, but before I would like to ask Lola, maybe you can tell us a little bit what is the part of cinema in your life? How much do you watch cinema? How important is it for you to watch, for example, fiction cinema, storytelling cinema, popular cinema even, and what does it do for you in your work? You also have to switch on the microphone, please.
There is always this comedy moment where we are like, oh, yeah, in fact, I don't know if I have something like, I mean, I like cinema. I try to see as much as I can. And I'm always like surprised or interested when I see like people doing some things that I don't understand exactly, like inventing new languages in cinema, or like trying procedures that I don't fully, that surprise me, or that I don't know where they go. And I think that was beautiful that happened to me, seeing these both movies, that I didn't know where they were going. And I love that. I love when I don't know where's the direction of it. I love the moment in Danech film when there is everything, there is this like encounter that is like prepared during the whole short film. And then at the end, the moment, like the encounter, is like an ellipsis that comes from the hair of this man who is being like washed by this woman. And then somehow this sex scene becomes like a very strange, poetic dream. And then we don't actually see it, and then we see just the after sex, like the meal. And I love that. I love these kind of experiments with form or with narration. I love to discover things that I don't know where they are going. And this happened also to me with the film of Nicolás. And yeah, I'm fascinated by like how people can reinvent also conventions in cinema, like reinvent like what can you actually do. That's why I found very boring all these kind of like script workshops or like these kind of things that people do when they want to promote their films and so on, because in fact, yeah, there is a kind of friction between like how people actually build up their films, the narrative of it, or yeah. And I think I discovered very much film when I did like my one film, like my only film until now, and prepare a new one. That was that the editing room is everything. In fact, you were writing a film in the editing room, and this I didn't know, because the theater you are like editing while you're doing. So for me, the big change from going from theater to the cinema was to realize, okay, that's what it means to be in the editing room. Like, it's crazy. You have all these possibilities and puzzles, and you have to rewrite everything. And I think, yeah, I think that's amazing about cinema, that you can really actually, yeah, reinvent narration and representation, and the conventions can be destroyed and reinvent in every shot.
I will read now a question for Nicolás that came in. It's from Juan. He's from Colombia. He's a writer, and he hates Narcos. And he writes, "The whole thing is a repetition of the old good cowboy, bad Indio scheme. I can understand that as a writer, you cannot stay in your story 100% close to the real history. But in Narcos, they just used and changed the thing in an apolitical way, or an apolitical way. I'm not completely sure how it's meant. So South Americans are always responsible for the addiction of the good North Americans and Europeans. If Narcos is just serious, do you think that writers and producers are being enough responsible with the stories they produce in relation?" It stops here. So it's about the responsibility of the people who make Narcos, we could say, basically, yeah?
Yeah, so I mean, I was quite interested in this idea of the responsibility, but I wanted in the film the responsibility of these shows always ends up being on the producers and the directors. And I wanted to a little bit hint at the fact that actors are also people, and they're also, they're not just the puppets of these puppet masters, but they have agency, and there are reasons why these actors might want to take. I mean, I know that, for example, Paco doesn't have that much money. I pay him poorly. Makes sense that he would want to do this, but at the same time, I still want to ask these questions of responsibility beyond Netflix. Let's say it's not just Netflix. I mean, of course, it's Netflix, but it's beyond. There are many people that are involved, and yeah, I wanted to think beyond the responsibility of creating beyond the directors and producers. In fact, Lázaro Gavino wrote a small sort of moral pamphlet for actors. It's a very strange text for an actor, I think, because it's not, it hints at some artistic ideas, but it's mainly sort of like this moral pamphlet of what should an actor do because of and I'm sure Constanze can talk more about this, perhaps, I'm not sure, depending on, I mean, but there is a sense of actors should work for someone else. Like the actor works for a director's vision, kind of like the idea of like the sports person, like the football player plays, you know, the position that the coach says, and you know, and passes the ball the way the coach wants, so that sort of thing. And in that gesture, the actor seems to stop being responsible of their own interpretation. It's like, I just did what I was told, let's say. But in a way, I wanted to think a little bit beyond that scheme for play acting. Like, what does it mean for an actor to be on screen and to represent these parts? And you know, I wonder sometimes, what does someone that play glamorized narco feel while they're doing it? Because it must be, you know, I mean, it could be interesting. It's not necessarily a bad thing, of course, but but there is an issue of responsibility there. And while I was interested in criticizing the whole narco project, it was, I mean, to a certain degree, it was more about this idea of acting and play acting and yeah.
Constanze, is that something that you maybe think about sometimes, the responsibility of you as an actress, but of other actors as well? And also in terms of how, for example, a community, a nation, or a country, a state is represented in its popular culture, because Germany also has its topics, so to speak, that make a good business on the world stage. And first of all, it's of course the Nazi years. Second, it's the GDR, the Unrechtsstaat, like the system of the GDR as being against its own people. So that and a lot of people, a lot of German actors and actresses, the entire star system actually, to a certain degree, is very busy working in all the. There's not a lot of male actors who haven't played a Nazi already at some part of their career. And I'm sure that there's also must be discussions going on if this is all like really okay, you know, to make such a good business of these things.
Yes, there are a lot of discussions at the moment. And I think because I'm so old-fashioned, I've mostly played characters of a very low morality. I was murdering, betraying, I was addicted to any kind of drugs, sexual, I don't know, in every directions, because I like this very much. I like to play characters which are outside my experience my experience in life. And I think for me, the stage is a place not to show how life should be, but how life should not be. So I give an example of mistakes people make in thinking, in behaving, in relationships. So the audience can sit and watch it and reflecting their own lives and experiences, and can judge over me or over the story I'm telling. And at the moment, it's difficult because when we have a piece about Nazis, not the Nazis in the 90 years ago, but the Nazis of today, it's very difficult because the discussion always is it good to give them a stage with their opinions, or do we have to always explain this is not our opinion, this is the opinion of the Nazis. So it's always judging on stage, and the audience does not have the possibility to judge by themselves, but it's made for them. And I think it's quite yes, it's PC, but it's quite boring for theater.
Mm-hmm. Danech, the question of national representation that, for example, Juan from Colombia, it's not national representation, but stereotypes about South America, for example, as opposed to the United States, who are European consumers of drugs and everything. The question of national representation pertains basically to every filmmaker to a certain degree, because you are also labeled as a Cambodian filmmaker, and you probably understand yourself even as a Cambodian filmmaker. Maybe you could tell us a little bit how much, because we, for example, in Germany, we don't know too much about the popular culture of your nation, of your country. We know a little bit, and you give us a little bit of a hint with this little television clip that you have in your movie yourself. But how much is it important for your understanding of yourself as a filmmaker, as an emerging artist, of also the group of Anti-Archive, this production company that you work with, which seems to be a very interesting collective? How much do you actually reflect on this representing your country also on the global level, on film festivals, and how much do you want to be part of this basically inevitable representational process?
Yeah, I think that I don't know if I can answer well, but when I start making the film, like since my very first film 2 years ago, I also think about this as well. Like when I start writing a script, I was like, okay, so I'm going to write a movie. So what will be the story? Like, should I represent something like of my own country? Like, what is it exactly? And I come to the point that to ask again myself, like, what is it being a filmmaker? Like, you making films, like for what for? Like this kinds of questions. And it's come to this identity as well, that I think it's difficult. Even now, I'm still asking the same questions, like the idea of representations. But in what I could say is that I just making first, 2 short films, so it's still very new, and I think that my beginning is more like to express myself, like more into my own voice. That I could say that that's my representations of what I do. And I think for the country itself, we do have a complicated history, that there's so many things you can describe about the history, about the country. And I think that I choose to bring things that close to me first.
Mm-hmm. I will read the next question from the audience. It's from Gabriela. She writes, "Hey everyone, wonderful films today. I can imagine that somebody already compared Nicolás Pereda to Philippe Garrel before, but I would like to know if there is really an influence there, and in what sense, and which directors inspire him, you, Nicolás, maybe some Mexican directors. And how can we see his other films? Where can we see them? I found the film very unique, actually better than all movies I saw from Garrel. I guess he took it to another, more intelligible level. Thank you."
I mean, it's an ultra generous reading of my films, but in any case, you can watch my other films on my Vimeo channel. Most of them are there without a password, so you can access them. So if you go on Vimeo, it's there. And it's strange because Philippe Garrel is not perhaps the first person I would think of when I think of like influences, although there is a film that I stole a scene from of Philippe Garrel several years ago for another movie, which is I think, but I forgot the name of it. So I mean, I there was at some point I watched several films of Garrel, and I'm sure they ended up influencing some of the things. And I remember specifically one scene that I stole, but there are other filmmakers that have been to me way more influential, and they are. It's strange because they're mostly contemporary directors, like Simon Liang or Pedro Costa, and Berazeta Cool, and Lisandro Alonso, and Lucrecia Martel, and Chantal Ackerman, people like that have a. But at the same time, those are influences that are sometimes very easy to recognize for myself, and sometimes I just know that I love their work so much that I watched it, and eventually some pieces of all of that ends up in the films. Yeah. Can I say something just about what we were talking before, perhaps, just really quickly? Because I was thinking about what Constanze mentioned about sort of playing actors with sort of, I don't know how you put it, but something like low moral value. That I think it's interesting, and I liked how you described that scenes should be about this, so you can sort of reflect upon it. And just perhaps to clarify a bit, that my problem with the whole project of Narcos was not to give voice to the narco traffickers, but that the whole project, and maybe it's very specific to these films about narco culture and the contemporary problem, is that they create a false understanding of the problem, which is that the understanding of the problem in TV and movies, and even it transcends this, and even sometimes in contemporary art, is that there is a that the narcos and the government, that the narcos are a common enemy of civil society and the government, sort of like a third entity. That it's that civil society on one hand, the government on the other, and then the narcos as the enemy of these two. And that understanding of our society is false, because there is no distinction between the narcos and the government. And there is no distinction, clear distinction, also from civil society and the narcos. And the problem is that they simplify a way more complicated problem into this kind of, and I think the person who asked that question before mentioned it, this idea that sort of cowboys and Indians, or sort of like reducing the problem to these bad guys and these good guys, and then they go at each other, where that is particularly problematic because we're living the situation right now. And it's very beneficial for the government, this division, this idea that there's those bad guys and they're too strong and we cannot deal with them. And that's why the situation is so bad for everybody. It's not us, it's that we're too weak for these big, bad people. And clearly that's not the situation we live in. So my main problem was not the representation of narcos, of a criminal, but the misrepresentation of that criminal, let's say. Because the whole project needs that misrepresentation, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Lola, you have worked with projects representing, so to speak, different parts of the world, different zones of problems, different areas of crisis. We could even also say different histories also. How much do you think about this problem of representation for example, in the selection of the people you work with on the stage? How much is this important for you? And how much do you feel even like a certain pressure, because you work in, for example, now you work in Germany in a rich country of the Western world that has a lot of, you could say, that can afford, to hire people like you to present different kinds of things. to its educated people in the theater in a very privileged situation, mostly, which creates all kinds of contradictions in itself. Yeah, and you work with this contradiction also. How important is this for you? The question of representation, and for the actors or people on the stage that you work with.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm coming from Argentina, from South America. I did like big part of my work with performers, some actors, some non-actors that were coming from Argentina. I also worked on topics that were like somehow these topics that you can't get rid of. Like I was born during the dictatorship in Argentina, and I did a piece that was called My Life After, where people were reconstructing their memories of the dictatorship. But I never felt that I had to do it. You know, I didn't feel like I have to do that because this is the relevant topic. I did it because I actually felt at some point that me, as part of this generation who was born on the cloud of the dictatorship, we had things to ask ourselves. So it wasn't this thing of you have to talk about the dictatorship because you come from Argentina and there were 30,000 people who disappeared. It was just something I needed to do with my group of friends, actors who were also born during this time and who had these stories behind. But of course, now when I'm working in Germany, the whole context of my work changed. And sometimes when you are, and I feel myself, I started to feel comfortable in this position of being a foreigner and being an outsider and talking about things I don't know much about, because I did a piece at Gorky Theater about the GDR that is called Atlas of Communism. And I cannot say I have an experience of the GDR, or I wasn't even raised in Germany. So it was a topic that was completely like far from me. But on the other hand, I was working with people who had this experience of growing up in the GDR, people who work for the Stasi, or people who were translators for the regime, or punk singers who were put in prison during the GDR. So these people had the experience, and these people were somehow guiding me through the process of writing the piece. And somehow I realized that that it was good that I was a foreigner, and it was good that I didn't know much about the history, because they had to explain it all. And this is something that usually people don't do because they think they already know. Yeah, we know what was the GDR. We know, we saw it in films, we talked about it, we had a museum, you know, but in fact, when you are like the stupid person coming from South America that says, but why and what happened and blah, 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 then people really start to talk about things that maybe they wouldn't talk to a person that grew up in their same context. So I think that is interesting. I realize when you are put in another context, when you are like somehow the stranger. And sometimes people tell you more intimate things to a stranger than to the people that they know the most. So sometimes this position also helps to build something.
I don't know if I'm going too far if I would say that the Woche der Kritik, we are part here of Woche der Kritik with our discussion, and the two of you with your films, you are part of the Woche der Kritik, which is a festival in Berlin that was designed because the big German film festival, the Berlinale, that is also going on incidentally this week, but only online, to a certain degree represented the movie world in a way that the people who started the Woche der Kritik were feeling that there was left something that was neglected by the bigger festival. And many of the films of this year, I watched almost all of them, we could consider to a certain degree expressions of a more fragile, a more subjectivity, more also an aesthetics that's a little bit more at risk, and we could also think could be under pressure from popular culture these days, because popular culture, now that it has become so dominated by these big corporations and platforms. I think that there's really now a huge impact that was also, of course, that became even stronger in the last year when we all had to adapt to the pandemic situation. Maybe to Nicolás and Danech, a question. First, Danech, maybe, do you feel in your own country, but also in your perception of what's going on globally, do you feel something like this growing impact of these big structures of popular culture that are also negotiating platforms a little bit about what is important on a global level, what is regionally interesting to put to be taken up onto a global level? Or do you see enough freedom for your practice? Do you see a good future for it? How do you conceive of the possibilities of you for working in the future?
I would say like it's hard. It's hard for the country that I'm living. Like Cambodia is very small, and the film community is also small, and also we don't receive much support from government or even like private sector also. So mostly to produce a film, to make a film, it's like either we approach to private investor or we do self like funding, or you have to apply to funding from outside, like from Europe or from other countries. I would say it's going forward, but very slow. And within this, what's happening since last year until now, I would say the way that people look at film is different also. Like this kind of streaming, and like we're having difficulty to watch film in the cinema. All this thing, I think that it's just hard to, how to say it, like I think more people would be go for this pop culture, even the mainstream film and stuff. So I don't see much progress in right now, but I hope that if things not just in the country but globally are getting better, I think there's little hope for that.
Nicolás, would you say that your audience is more you are targeting more, or maybe you found more of an audience nationally in Mexico? Are you, from what you can surmise, have you found more of an audience like on the international circuit of film festivals? Because you seem to me very much like, and not in a bad way, but in a good way, a typical festival director somehow.
Yeah, it's complicated to say because also there is a strange idea of thinking that work that you make in a part of the world ends up having legitimization in a different part of the world, and then so it gains value by it being accepted. Let's say, I mean, our case, let's say, like I make films in Latin America, and then because they get accepted in Europe in some circuits, then suddenly I can come back to Latin America and tell them, see, it was not so bad. Like the Europeans said it was not so bad, which is a horrible position to have to, it's like going to your parents to find some legitimacy and then come back. And so, but I also don't think that's what's happening. I think it's more than I'm not sure, but I think more than national sort of circuits, there is what you mentioned, sort of like festival circuits, perhaps. But then at the same time, the idea of festival circuits is strange because there is now festivals in every town, and they're very different from one another, and the sort of curatorial practices are radically different from one place to the next. So, and also I remember the first year with my first film that I traveled to festivals, I was really confused because I had this idea that there was something that we could consider a festival film, which was all these movies that I had been able to watch by like friends giving me DVDs. I remember the first a cool movie that I watched, and it was like, you know, it didn't look so good, and it was like this good friend from China is filmmaker, and I watched, and I was like, and so when I traveled to a festival for the first time, and I thought these are the, you know, it's going to be full with these strange films from around the world, and then you realize that that's not the case, that there's a lot of very normal commercial films in festivals, and that this idea of festival films is more that on top of the fact that they have all these normal films, there's a couple of strange films that wouldn't fit anywhere else. So anyway, I don't have a concrete answer, but I think it's more like there's an international circuit of people interested in more or less similar things. And you find them in this type of spaces and having conversations in different places, but it's not necessarily a national project. I find also in Mexico, enough people to talk to, and other places in Latin America, that we make work that interests each other, that might not be the work that is most visible, but it's work that we're interested in. But it's not confined to nationalities, I think. I think it's confined to certain circuits and and also we, you know, the world now is so, in some ways it is globalized, and so at least the work that we do can be linked also and maybe a small parenthesis, is quite different than in theater, perhaps, where in theater is a lot this globalizing project is much more complicated, because watching theater on YouTube is a very strange experience. And so more or less, I would assume, I mean, both Lola and Constanze probably know much more about this, but I would think that if you're a student of theater and you're young, and you're eager to watch what all these names that you hear about and all these people around the world, but then you cannot have very little access to all of that. Whereas in cinema, you're in, you know, if you're studying cinema, very quickly you can get a hold of all of the history of cinema and all of the contemporary. And if you want to watch it, it's available fairly easily. So yes, in that sense, many different groups of people interested in similar things can be developed fairly quickly, because a lot of people around the world can have the similar references. Whereas I would assume that in theater, that's much more complicated.
I think would be a very interesting discussion for another 2 hours or so, that cinema to a certain degree maybe even is a successor of theater in creating and maintaining and producing a national identity, what was like the stage language of the 19th century, and also like the institution of the National Theatre in the 19th century became, after the Second World War, to a certain degree, the national cinema that was presented in Cannes on the red carpet, where it's never forgotten to mention that this is the entry from France and this is the entry from Germany. And the Germans have for decades now been angry somehow that they have been often been ignored by Cannes, you know, and this is a big topic for the German movie industry and everything. But that is a little bit, would probably get us a little bit too far. I will present Junia's question, which gets us back to the beginning of the discussion, because she asks again, but in a little bit more detail, what I posed as a question to Danech in the right at the beginning of our talk. Junia writes, "Hi everybody. First, thank you for these films to Danech and Nicolás. I would like to ask Danech about these movies playing on the cell phone of one of the clients in the salon. If it is a popular movie in Cambodia, I liked when the director says life is life and movie is movie, but the actress disagrees. Maybe you can elaborate one more time a little bit on the confusion maybe that you wanted to create with this clip, Danech. Productive confusion."
Yeah, for me it's more how do you say it, like it's referred to my own discussions also. When I watched that movie, I was like, somehow like this, it's a kind of a debate, but it's a debate on set. Like this actress, she act like follow the director, but then after she was just like, but it doesn't make sense to her, like to just talk and talk, but she doesn't feel anything. And then that's how she tells the director, and the director itself, for me it's a bit like how said what can I say, like at first he's trying to defend his idea about like you, it's like a how said, like to show love in a classy way, like something like that, you use your words and that's all, like that. But then when she tried to raise all these like reasons that she thinks that that's not make sense for her, and he kind of changing his mind, and he create this kinds of thing like to divide between the life, and like life is different than a movie. So I would say like it's I don't say that the director, it's what he said it's wrong or right, but it's just like his own perspective way. So I find it's very interesting. Like I see that scene sequence in the film was it just leave me the questions. So that's yeah.
Also a little bit, at least that's what I thought to have understood about it. Isn't it also a bit that melodrama, or like the popular narrations, give us a little bit of a misleading idea about love, for example, because it doesn't want to be very completely honest about the lower aspects of love, the bodily aspects, the aspects that are not as reputable, you know, and wants us to certainly give us an idealized idea of love, yeah, which means which means it conceptually has to negate the body to a certain degree, yeah, and this seems to have been a point of this scene, if I understood correctly.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I think yeah, that's also something about the ideal of showing love, like that people giving it's kind of like a standard, like to love, to say that you love, it's like you have to say it. That is like the way that people would do, and then when you start to do different, they start to think like this is not right. So yeah,
because this pertains, and this could maybe be a question as vague as it may be for a closing round. This pertains one of the central discussions of aesthetics and politics during the decades, which is the question of on which level of representation, or where do we find something like truth? You know, is it in the body, in the physical presence of somebody on stage or in front of the camera? Or is it actually in these endless levels of reflexivity that Nicolás, or you, or all of them, all of you basically like trying to catch? Maybe maybe you can try to improvise some remarks on the question of honesty, truth, in presenting yourself to the world in the things that you do. Constanze, is it too big a question? I'm sure, but maybe you can still give us some statement about it.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Actually, sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
The question was basically like if we try to pin this age-old question about being truthful in art, you know,
yes.
Where could we find, in which aspect of your work could we find this truth that is still looked for?
I think you have to find the truth in the lie you tell people, because we are, or me as an actress, I always lie to people because I'm pretending things I haven't experienced or I do not feel, but I have had this very strict education in drama school, and I think what I learned is to really feel a true feeling or experience a true emotion or action on stage, despite the fact that it has nothing to do with my reality. So you can tell a truth while you are lying.
That is very well put. Lola, can you maybe say from your practice, is there also like something like a possible answer to that complicated question, but foundational question nevertheless?
I think when you work in the field between reality and fiction, and there are people who are also talking about experiences they had, as Constanze was saying, okay, I have to pretend like an experience that I didn't have, but in the case of the performers of my work, they actually had these experiences. But what people also sometimes is not so aware that during the process of rehearsals and during the process of writing the piece, this experience becomes something else. Basically, it becomes a text and they become performers. So they get detached from it. So what you actually experience in a theater play where there are these veterans reconstructing, for example, a memory of the war, it is, of course, completely constructed. The text is written from the first to the end. The gesture is rehearsed. The voice had been trained. The body is there with a certain presence and a certain form. The light, everything has been constructed. So, of course, the experience of authenticity is completely produced. And I think what happened actually in the theater when there is this person who is in fact saying a text that is based on an experience he had and he's performing even if he had the experience and so on, is that the bond with the audience is different, because there is this kind of beside all these layers of representations, there is this feeling of responsibility for the audience, that they say, okay, I'm here listening to you and you're telling this to me, this that you experience, and I feel somehow with a different kind of relationship than the one that I would have with an actor. I'm not saying better or worse, it's different. It creates another relationship, and I think that's where I found the interest in this friction between reality and fiction, that the experience of theater becomes something else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Nicolás, if we would talk in categories of philosophy, I would put you more into the group of deconstruction than classical ontology. How much are concepts like truth or authenticity or even honesty as well important for your work, and on which level maybe of your work could we find it?
It's funny because the more time passes, the more confused I get with these questions, because I think when I started sort of blending fiction and non-fiction, I had very concrete ideas of what that meant. And my initial thoughts at the very beginning had to do with just ideas of formal presentation, meaning that a film is a fiction film when it looks like one, and a documentary is a documentary when it looks like one. So questions that have nothing to do with reality, but questions that these are two forms of cinema that have their own sort of formal conventions. And so when something looks like one thing, then we call it documentary. And when something looks like another thing, then we call it fiction. So I'm going a little bit away from your question, but that was kind of like a little bit central to my understanding of reality, was kind of that I was going to avoid the whole question of it. I was going to avoid thinking whether this is true or not truth, because at the end of the day, it's just a certain different formulations that make it look like truth, or another formulation that makes it not look like truth. But the relationship that these two things had with truth was similar. It was just that one makes it look more like one way, closer to truth than not. But then, if like I try to look at it from further away, independently of whether it's documentary or not, I think the problem of truth is a problem that transcends art, of course, and that at the end of the day is just all a matter of perception. Like, you know, depending on where you're standing, the things that you look at mean one thing, and if you move away and you see them from the other perspective, then there's something else. And if someone else is standing and looking at the same thing at the same time as you, the thing in itself is not one thing, but it's two different things. And truth is generated by the person perceiving it, not by the thing in and of itself. And so in relation to that, I'm trying to make films that the honesty, let's say, doesn't come from my attempt to create things and represent things as they are, but to simply represent things the way I perceive them, to really try to be closer to my perception, to try to be in tune to my perception, and to be honest with myself, but not as a project really in relation to the audience, which I don't think too often about, but as a project for myself, because that's the whole idea. If I want to make portraits of these people that I'm working with, the whole project is so that I'm content and I'm excited about being able to produce these portraits that have to do with my perception of them, as opposed but I always understand that I'm not making films that will define them in any way. They also understand that this is just sort of my perception of them, and you know, because they're actors, it's kind of like a construct, something that we talk about, and so it's not just my perspective on them, but it's also theirs. So it's kind of like a collaboration in building a certain truth that is true for us, let's say. I mean, it's a very easy way to deflect responsibility by saying, you know, truth doesn't matter, doesn't exist, it's just a perception. But at the end of the day, it's hard to not. Perhaps with some subject matters, it's a lot heavier. Perhaps with, like, for example, with Lola's project that I saw, what was it called? The minefield, maybe?
Yes.
Because you're dealing with a war and soldiers in a war and their own experiences, then it's not so easy to just say, well, who knows where the truth lies? It's whoever's perspective, doesn't matter. So there, perhaps the question of certain political truths become perhaps more important in the case of my projects, because maybe I'm dealing with a truth that has to do with moral truths or particular sort of authenticity of a particular person. Maybe it's a little bit less, the responsibility is smaller. I don't know.
Thank you, Nicolás. Danech, we close with you. We started with you, we close with you. In your film, there is an important part of the film is something that we could discuss actually about what is the status of these scenes that Lola has described quite thoroughly. Like we could call it like something like an epiphany maybe, or a vision, or just a fantasy, a mental image somehow. And it gives us an impression of how many different levels of authenticity or truth or experience, to put it more simple. We can go through within 14 minutes of a short movie already. How much is this for you part of your filmmaking practice, that actually filmmaking is possibly a little bit more than, for example, stage acting or stage directing, possibility to go through certain levels of these processes. Like it's maybe a little bit more easier in a film to show something that could be actually a dream. Yeah? We could, of course, also, there's also ways to do it on a stage, but with the moving image, we are more closer to that. How much does that attract you to the movie, to the movies that you are making, that you are, in any second, you can switch to a mental image of some protagonist, or like, or even like get me to have a dream of meeting some, like of being in Cambodia for what of an hour?
Yeah, I think I think part of it is dealing with the way that I'm interested about filmmaking. Is about dreams and memory, and I think these two things for me, it's play a really important part of the way I think about the way I structure my films as well, because I think that the reason that I love about film, like by watching film and stuff like that, it's like to sit in a cinema and to spend like 2 hours. For me, it's like you go into a different world, and that would I would reflect to the dream that I had during my sleep. So, and then sometimes it's a mix of memories and stuff like that. So I'm kind of experiment that the way I dream into films. That and it's really first coming through the experience, through my own experience, and to really try to put there on the table and see, does it make sense? Like, does it feel, does it make sense to me? And then does it make sense to other or not? Like that.
Thank you very much. We will wrap it up here. Thank you, Constanze. Thank you, Lola. Thank you, Nicolás, Danech. And thank you to the people outside of Zoom. We hope you found it interesting. Thank you to Woche der Kritik for hosting this, and a good evening to everybody.
Yes, also from my side, thank you very much to every one of you. I was sitting the whole time here in the cinema, following your thoughts. For me, it was a pleasure, and thank you. Yeah, talking about dreams, thank you very much, Danech, for staying awake. It's now nearly 4:00 a.m. in Cambodia, right? And thank you, Nicolás, for spending this time in front of a screen while it's very sunny in the back. And thank you, Constanze and Lola, for engaging in the discussion about these films. And thank you, Bert, for moderating. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, also thank you to our audience for listening, for joining Critics Week. I hope tomorrow you are again with us. Tomorrow we have a slightly different format. We are hosting a critics debate between Maggie Lee and Patrick Holzapfel about Wet Post on Asher Street by Sion Sono and Dracula Sex Tape by Olivier Godin. And yeah, I'm really excited about this maybe confrontational talk. And yeah, definitely, I think it's going to be very interesting. I hope you are joining us as well tomorrow and in the next days until Sunday. Yes, thank you for joining again.